see you. Oh my gosh.
Okay, here's the crowd. I don't know how well you can see him.
I see a bunch of pixelated images, which works just fine for me.
All right. So you've got about 10 minutes. Maybe do like a 5 to 10 second intro, and then we'll get into some of those questions, and then we'll see how the chat goes.
Okay, I'm Avellone. I am creative director at City Entertainment. We make a crap load of role-playing games, and I spent about 19 years doing this. And usually, what I spend my days doing is doing a lot of writing of characters and dialogue for the actual games themselves. And that's my 10-second spiel.
Awesome, thank you. And while we're talking, if anyone has a question, just put your arm up. Chris won't be able to see it because you're pixelated, and I'll ask him if we've got time at the end. So, all right, Chris, some of those questions that I'll flick through to you, and then we'll see if we've got a bit of time.
Okay, the first person, the first question, and by the way, whoever asked this, you're very brave, thank you very much. So it was, when designing or creating characters, where do your ideas come from, and what has been some initial starting points for those characters? Okay, that's a pretty good question. So it usually depends on the actual game itself and what sort of systems we're trying to do for the game. But I'll start with a pretty easy example. So when we were doing Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, a game that I'll be quite honest, I was not very excited about because I wasn't a huge Star Wars fan at the time. So when we were prepping to do the game, I had to do a lot of research on the Star Wars universe. And it occurred to me that the whole concept of Jedi was pretty ridiculous. And the whole concept of the Force just caused me to ask a whole bunch of questions that either got me mad or I didn't have a really good answer to. But as these questions kept building, I thought it would be kind of cool if there was a character in your party who asked a lot of the same questions and then also posed those questions to the player to get them something to think about. And that ended up being the main adversary in the game, a character called Kreia. And I wanted her to be a former Sith Lord, and as a result, she had some Palpatine influences that she drew on. But ultimately, she came from all my questions that I had about Star Wars and the Force. But ideas and the sort of concepts behind characters can come from almost anywhere. When we were working on Fallout New Vegas, we did this one downloadable content pack called Old World Blues. And the big fixture in that DLC was, hey, the character gets a brand new home base with all this new functionality, et cetera, et cetera. But when we were designing it, because the DLC was kind of crazy 1950s science, it reminded me of this graphic novel I'd read way back when called Transmetropolitan. And in this comic book, they have this character that lives in an apartment where all his appliances have their own artificial intelligence, but they're also all kind of crazy too. So for example, he has a drug-addicted coffee maker that always wakes up high every morning, and he can't convince it to make coffee properly. So when I remember reading that, I thought that would be a good spin to put on some of the appliances that we have for the home base in Old World Blues. And sometimes, it can break down to the system mechanics for the game. For example, in Wasteland 2, which recently came out and it's doing pretty well, some of the characters that I designed for that game that ended up being companions of the party were actually based on them having the right skill set to be effective and useful in the next area the player is likely to go to. So for example, hey, the next area would be really helpful to get a stealth character. So I'm like, okay, well, this particular companion should revolve around stealth. And then I build up a character just using those mechanics. But generally those ideas can come from anywhere, whether it's systems, a piece of concept art, graphic novel, some TV series you saw. I even know designers that actually base their characters on real people. Don't really advocate that, especially if you end up meeting that person in real life, but that's also a source of inspiration too.
Awesome, cool. You've also, so we've got students in the audience and teachers, and I guess one of the things that, just a bit of a deviation from the questions is, what would you say to, I guess, this room of teachers with promoting and getting kids looking at an area like, I guess, creative design in games? And we've been talking before about the computer science things, but obviously game development is huge, and your role is not strictly on the computer science, but it's around the development of characters. So are there any things that you might say to teachers around developing courses or engagement for students?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the games that come out nowadays usually come with what's called a editor or a tool set that the actual developers use to build the game. And Bethesda's really famous for this. Like, for example, for Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, they had the Garden of Eden creation kit, which was all the tool sets for making the areas, scripting the characters, writing the dialogue. And then they gave that out to the community. And they're like, hey, you can use this tool to make your own content for the game, and it just slips right in. So what I would advocate is that get a hold of some of those mod sets. There's plenty of documentation and instructions for it, and you can actually use those tool sets to create your own game content and have other people play through it. And that's probably the best way to train yourself to be a game developer. One of the best game developers we ever had was someone that took this game called Oblivion, and in his spare time, he decided he was just going to redesign the whole world. Like, that was an odd. Like, he just rebuilt the entire world, did a bunch of brand new quests, new areas, and like 300,000 people downloaded it. It got like a 9.7 score on the net, which is notoriously finicky and doesn't get scores like that. Hit patch notes, revisions, and so when he sent his resume to us, we already knew who he was, and we were willing to hire him on the spot just because he already had all the experience that we needed.
Awesome. Okay, and I can't remember, what were the other two questions that I flipped through? We've got time for probably one of those, unfortunately. We're blasting through it. Do you want to pick which question you want to answer?
Sure. So basically, one question is about game balance, and how do you go about balancing game? And so the quick answer here is that it's actually usually not too hard to design a system for a game. The real trick is trying to make sure it feels fun from moment to moment, and that it's actually balanced. And the biggest piece of advice you can offer there is start with the most basic system in your game first, like walking. Make sure walking feels good, and make sure running feels good. And if you're doing like a Super Mario game, for example, it's very, very important that jumping feel good. So once you actually sort of build a movement set for the character, then you can start building levels around it and actually doing more of the core design. Once those things all feel good to you, there might be some tweaking you need to do, but the best piece of advice I have is never tweak more than one game system at a time. So, for example, when we're working on Fallout New Vegas, if we're trying to do combat balance, we wouldn't simultaneously try to adjust the healing rate of stim packs, the amount of hit points the player gets per level, and also the damage the monsters do. We would just choose one of those three things, modify it, then see how it affects the game balance. Because when you try to modify more than one system at one time, you can really skew the results and cause some crazy behaviors when you can probably isolate the system you need to tweak a lot easier than that.
Awesome. I think you would have been a very interesting student to teach in high school.
I'm sure I frustrated my teachers very much.
It's fantastic. All right, we are unfortunately just about out of time. Could we give Chris a massive round of applause? So there's a lot of glare here, so I think you're 4:30 in the evening, something like that?
That is correct.
Yeah, we're 10 o'clock in the morning here, so...
No, I'm barely functioning at 10 o'clock. You guys are impressed with me.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. Thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you very much for the time.
Cheers. Cheers.